This is what this tour is all about, the next generation. And that's what we're trying to do, is let our young people know their heritage and what freedoms have been given them through great, great sacrifice. And we are a blessed people. And so I'm so grateful for David and other young people. We appreciate the young men who are able to join us today from South Charlotte and the Christian school there, Pastor Joseph Campbell, and thank you for being here. And then some other representatives are here today, and I know Brad Jenkins pastors up in Landis area and is the GOP chairman for the county, and we appreciate that. And then also we appreciate David Willis being here, a representative from this area, and serves in Raleigh. And thank you for coming, Mr. Willis. Appreciate you being here. And then also Jason Williams is a good friend, Faith and Freedom, and appreciate you being a part of this today, and just so many others. And I want our mayor, Bobby Kilgore, to just come and give you a brief greeting and welcome you to Monroe. Our mayor has served our city in some capacity for 54 years. And let's give him a hand, all right? He's been the mayor of Monroe for 16 years and finishes up his service this December. And so thank you, Mr. Kilgore. We certainly love you and your family and appreciate your service.
Thank you, Pastor. 54 years. I started when I was 6 years old, so do the math. I'm 60 years old. I don't feel 60 years old. Good morning, everyone. It's a great day to be with you. It's a great day to be at Shining Light Church anyway. But it's a great day to be here to serve the Lord and listen to the restoration services, I know, which will bless all of our heart. We had lunch and standing around the church, I've met several people, a lot of people from out of town. So I want to say welcome to you, but welcome to everyone. But if you're from out of town, we want to give you a real warm welcome. I met some ladies from, was it Arkansas? No, in fact, I see them sitting here. I'm sorry if I messed it up. But anyway, it's nice to see you folks. Nice to meet you. Glad to have everyone here. Welcome to Monroe on behalf of the entire city, on behalf of the entire city council. And I want to thank Chad Connelly, I hope I'm dressing you folks right, and David for bringing this restoration tour to Monroe. What a great day, what a great service that I've already heard about, what it will do for our young people and our old people alike, such as me. But anytime we can bring a restoration tour or any type of service of this nature to our city, it's a great thing to do. It is the thing to do. And it's always a privilege, again, for me to be at Shining Light. It's a privilege for the invite, Pastor. Thank you so much for that. And again, thank you, folks, for being here. We wish you the best. And you folks out of town, please have a safe trip going back home. And again, a great warm welcome from the city of Monroe. Thank you.
Thank you. Tonight we are hosting a meet and greet in our church lobby for some candidates that are running for city council. One of our own, Julie Thompson. Raise your hand there, Julie. We're praying for her. Appreciate her stepping up. Let's give her a hand. And then some other council candidates, as well as the Mayor Pro Tem who's running for mayor. And just as Brother Barton has said in this tour, we are not trying to tell anyone who to vote for, but we are trying to tell people, folks that we've met and that we have researched and got to know, and we are comfortable in them being where we are on so many of the issues, and so we want to present them to our community, inviting folks to come in. And so be a part of that this evening, and we're thankful for the opportunity that God has given there. Appreciate the preachers who are able to be here today, and then also Mark Harris, now with the Family Research Council. And so thank you, Mark, for your service and for being here today as well. And we've just got so amazing opportunities that God has given us. And one is to have the Raines family with us. I love these folks, and I know my brother does, and they're up there in revival with him, and Brother Wells is preaching for them. And so they're going to come and sing a song that Natalie wrote, "We Need the Church." And that's what this is all about, the church finding its voice. And may the Lord help us to honor, respect, and regard his work through the local church anew. Listen to the words of this song as they sing.
Special place where God meets with his children. A place where hurt is healed and hearts made whole. Where burdens shared are lifted and our spirits fed. We need the church. We need the church.
So many memories of great things God has done. When saints come in and praise the Lord for all the victories won. A place of safety, the bond of love that's there can't be explained. I need the church. I need the church.
A special place where God meets with his children. A place where hurt is healed and hearts made whole. Where burdens shed are lifted and our spirits fed. We need the church. We need the church. The special place where God meets with his children. A place where hurt is healed and hearts made whole. Where burdens shed are lifted and our spirits fed. We need the church. We need the church.
Where burdens shared are lifted and our spirits fed. We need the church. We need the church.
Amen. Amen. Wonderful. Praise the Lord. I thank God for the church and how God has used it so in my life and the life of my family. And it is the church that must rise up. God has already put it in place. Think about that. All that can be done and accomplished in this day through a local church family finding its voice. Chad Connelly is being used of God with Faith Winds. We love him and thank God for how the Lord is using him to stir people in this hour. So we're going to watch a brief video introducing his ministry, and then he's going to come, and then we're going to move along and just see what God has for us through Brother Barton here in just a moment. And so let's watch this video.
Thank y'all for coming out. Brother Tim, love and appreciate you, man. And this guy do just a great job. I mean, just a phenomenal leader. And we're in a bad shortage of leadership. Doug and Chris, I've known them for 20 years. Thanks for bringing the family. As somebody who cannot carry a tune with a bucket, I really appreciate y'all. Every time I hear you, I got your CD. I love y'all and just appreciate what you do to minister. And all of these other folks coming out, these young people, you are in for a treat. I got to give you a little bit of context, though, and why somebody from just south of here is here. I grew up in Prosperity, South Carolina, about 2 hours south, and just, amen. Hey, we got Pastor D's here, too. We got a little South Carolina representation. And so I'm one of those people that just got shaken by God to get involved and not put aside our responsibilities. Grew up in that little town and went to Clemson, got my degree in engineering, and went in the Army where I really became more appreciative of America. Like, we love our freedoms, right? And we take them for granted way too much. We don't recognize what a gift we've been given. I don't know if y'all been watching scenes from Afghanistan. I know our buddy David Barton and Cheryl and their ministries have been rescuing Christians out of there. But, you know, we in America don't relate to how bad it must be to throw your baby over a barbed wire to get them out. Like, we're not doing that, right? Or clinging on. You know, Mark Harris, you imagine clinging on to a plane that's taken off because you'd rather drop to your death than to experience the Taliban? I don't relate, right? Dr. Edwards, we can't relate to this stuff. But yet we're watching freedoms be taken away in America every single day. And guess what? When you start paying attention to the little ones, you've already lost the big ones. And so some of this was hitting me. Came out of armor school as a young Army officer and a tanker and just fired up about America and knew I had to do something. I'd been married, my college sweetheart, had 2 little boys. They grew up being involved in politics, not official, just trying to be a Christian involved and encourage Christians to get involved and activate, have their voices and their votes heard and felt in every election all over the place. Started speaking on this stuff and got involved at a local level kind of informally. In fact, that's how I met Doug and Chris, was school choice. We've been fighting the school choice stuff since 2002, right? And in South Carolina, just trying to make a difference, trying to be involved. And in 2006, my wife of 18 and a half years died tragically, left me a single dad with a 5 and a 9-year-old who saw their mom in a place nobody wants to see. And but God provided, and I met a girl who was also widowed like I was. She had 2 little girls, I had 2 little boys, and although we walk by faith, not by sight, I got to watch God work in my life, and Dana came in my life. And that's been 14 years ago. I got back involved in politics, and all this stuff is why I'm standing here. You know, God's got a story, right? He's unveiling it in His perfect timing. As much as we don't like things that go on, and we probably wouldn't have chosen that for our path, God knows what He's doing, and He's got a plan despite. And that day when I held my wife who had passed away, Romans 8:28 punched me in the face. I had not read it that day. I wasn't studying it, but I'd buried it in my heart, young people. I'd studied, I'd memorized Scripture. My dad believed in that. I had a drug problem growing up. My daddy drugged me to church and drugged me to youth group. And if you feel that way, then amen, and you're in a better place for it. But I asked the Lord that day, holding my wife, all things, I challenged God. Really, all things, God. And He put on my heart, did you believe it yesterday? I told Him I did. And He asked me if I'd believe it that day. And I told Him I would. And He asked me to trust Him. And Dana comes along, and we put a family together, and that's 14 years ago. And lo and behold, I'd have never gotten involved in politics had every bit of that happened. I had a wife in depression. It wasn't like I could go out and travel with 2 little boys. So I ran for state party chairman in 2011 as a Christian conservative, happened to be a Republican. Of course, a lot of y'all know, because you're here in North Carolina, that South Carolina is the first in the South primary state. So you get a big, bright spotlight. And there's the Iowa caucus and the first in the nation primary in New Hampshire. Then it comes to South Carolina. So it gave me the opportunity to do all this television. And I learned something about the media. I know we hear the media, they're so liberal. They're so negative. Mark Harris, they're not all liberal. It's only like a 95, 96% number. Marcus, it's so overblown. Mark knows pretty well how they are. And I had to pick on you there, buddy. He's learned it the hard way too. They hate you. Most of them hate you. They don't believe in what you believe in. They don't have your worldview. And so I got pushed hard on an MSNBC show. where I was actually beating up my own party for leaving out the faith vote. And a guy named Reince Priebus, some of y'all heard his name. He was President Trump's first chief of staff, and Reince saw me on the show. He texted me. Turns out he was a believer too, and I knew the guy was one of his 50 state chairmen, but I didn't know him. And he said, "Hey, nice job defending your faith. I'm a believer too. Let's talk." Out of that, I had beat them up over leaving out the faith vote. It's the largest, most untapped, most underappreciated voting bloc in all of American political history. And they know it, all the politicos know it, but they don't want to talk to us because they want our votes and our voices. Well, this fired me up, made me mad. So Priebus and I began a thing. I got to be the first ever National Director of Faith Engagement for either party. Seems like there might be one party kind of ignoring it completely now, but we sure try. And so I got to go to 40-something states, speak to 80,000 pastors and faith leaders and people like y'all, just saying, let's get involved. Don't let your voices be silent. Go rise up and make sure your voices and your votes are heard and felt at mayor. You know, mayor's here. Appreciate him coming. And every elected official, they need to know that we're out here. And I think that's what David Barton's going to convince you of a little bit more too. And so in that travel, you know, it just reaffirmed for me that the key are pastors. Pastor leaders are not data points like political people think of you, but they're multipliers. And if we can get influencers to be like a Tim Cruz and what a Mark Harris has been and a Dr. Mike Edwards out there and other pastors in here, then we've changed America. We don't have to put up with this stuff. Well, I think I was one of the only senior staffers in the RNC at the time not to go work in the Trump White House. And that's when I started Faith Wins. And Faith Wins just became an extension of that, just to go travel around and build relationships, because I believe in that. That's how I met my buddy Joey Deese down here, who pastors just down in Rock Hill, South Carolina. Was if we can just empower pastors with the tools and resources to go make a difference, maximize the Christian vote, realize that Jesus is not running for office. Therefore, we're always voting for the lesser of two evils. Therefore, it's our responsibility to find out what they believe in. We vote not on politics or party or personality. We vote on policies and principles that most closely align with what we believe in. That's been the message the whole time. Well, a couple of years ago, I meet this awesome lady, and we form a coalition that she's going to tell you about in a little bit. She and her husband, Jim and Joan Lindsay, have been traveling around America with me these last few weeks, just trying to get the word out about what David Barton is communicating to you, that God's role in America is irreplaceable. And before you think that you can't make a difference, and this is a real message to you young people, you can make a massive difference. We've had now, this is our 16th meeting in our 6th state on the American Restoration Tour. Last night we went over 5,000 people that have heard this message you're about to hear. We're about to leave you with a responsibility to pass it on. We're about to leave you with a responsibility to do something with what you heard, not just take it in and be fired up. You know, motivation is like bathing. You got to do it again, right? It's an inspiration to do more than you've ever done. See, you got it. Thank you. And so to do more than you've ever done before, to find out what you've got to do to influence those people around you. And I got this message yesterday. I think there's a State House member in here, so he's going to relate to this. We got some pastors involved. Brother Cruz was involved in this. I got a call about a month ago that people on maybe our side in North Carolina were about to slip in a sports gambling effort to fill a hole in the budget. And I thought, that ain't right. And so I had a donor down in your area, in my neck of the woods, who said, didn't you get involved in South Carolina to get rid of video poker? I said, I did. He said, I want your help in North Carolina as well. We made a few phone calls, and it must have worked, because I got this yesterday when I was speaking wherever we were at in Winston-Salem. Drive for North Carolina sports betting bill stalls in the House. That happened yesterday because 7 pastors made phone calls to people out here who made phone calls to representatives. There's 5,000 of y'all, and today more than that, who have heard this message from David Barton. And what we want to say to you is tag your it. Tag your it. We can't do this by ourselves. This is a time when I believe God's allowing his people to rise up. Listen, if he was done with us, we'd be out of here based on what I'm reading. Amen? And we're not here. We're not out of here. We're here. Now, he doesn't need me, and he doesn't need you, and he doesn't need America. I know all that. But the fact he's left us here has left us with a great responsibility. It is our Esther moment. I don't know if it's our D-Day. I don't know if it's our 1776. This is our moment to rise up and take back this country where religious liberty was founded and built and the entire world looks for. Our country's so unbelievably awesome that even the people that hate us won't leave. That's incredible to me. There's plenty of place to go, but yet they won't leave. And I want to introduce you to a lady that's really been the brain trust of this, who really empowered me, who poured gas on the fire, who was the visionary, the strategic person to put in a legal arm and a foundation and a communications section. And we built a little coalition because last year, you saw the video, we did 89 meetings between July and December in 15 states with 2,965 pastors in the middle of a pandemic. And she said, what are you going to do this year? And I said, I believe I want to take around a guy like David Barton to teach American Christian history. So I want to introduce you to somebody who's my friend, my running buddy. And if you've seen a Christian on television dealing with the media, it's a pretty good chance Joan Lindsay with Lindsay Communications trained him. She's a talented, awesome lady from California and Dallas. Y'all welcome up my friend Joan Lindsay.
Sure. Good afternoon, everyone. It's very nice to be here. Very nice to see you. We are having the time of our lives, driving all over the place. Jim is very kind to come along with me doing this. As Chad has told you, I have two organizations, Lindsay Communications and the Lindsay Foundation. They're each about 30 years old. So I first met Chad about 2 years ago. And already at Lindsay Communications and the foundation, we'd been saying, where's the church? There are so many of us. Why are we all so quiet? Now, I know the media wants to silence the church, and they'd be just as happy if you never said anything and disappeared and stayed off in your corner. But that's not right, and there are too many of us, and excuse me, but I'm pretty sure we started this country, so why should we do that? So I was chairing a panel at a leading conservative organization. Reince Priebus was supposed to be on the channel, and he got inducted into the Navy that day. They scheduled it the same day. So I got Chad Connelly instead, and I'd never met him before. But I came back to the office, and I said to Kyle Horton, who runs the foundation, I said, okay, you know how we always wish the church would network and get together and find their voice? There's somebody doing this. He was with the RNC, and now he's doing this out of South Carolina. Hey, what if we gave it some firepower? Let's bring in, like us, and we'll fund this thing, and we'll bring some communication strategies and work our networks and throw some media at it. And hey, let's pull in Brad Dacus, who is the founder and president of the Pacific Justice Institute. They're a whole legal network that fights religious freedom cases. What if we firepowered it? And so Chad was good with that, and there it was. So a coalition is nothing more than just a partnership, basically, where people get together, organizations get together, and they decide to take something, make it bigger. Just make it bigger, stronger, working together. So we called it The Church Finds Its Voice. And every month, we decided we would basically write pastors all over the United States. And thanks, FRC. You guys push out to all your lists, too. Thank you. J.P. Duffy agreed to do that, and you guys are just awesome. But the churches get a letter from us, and we give the pastors everything they need to know, what your legal rights are, communication strategies, how the media works, what the church's history in this country is, just everything you need to know, and encouragement, too. Every month. So we call them comms, communications, they're letters. And number 24 just went out a couple of weeks ago. They're all archived. They're on the Church Finds Its Voice website if you want to read them, because our goal was to help the church do what it should do what it legally can do what the Bible says it should do, and be what it should be. So that's our whole goal, is to raise that up. So now, a word about the media, because I know they're sort of the enemy of the church. I do a lot of work in Hollywood, too, and I will tell you, there are a lot of believers working in both industries, the news media and the entertainment media. They have a bit of a rough go. They have to network together. We help them to do that. We help them to get started in the entertainment industry in a healthy and good way, and to be salt and light there. And there are Christian film schools. I've started one on the campus of Biola University. In case you guys ever want to go to film school, call me and I will help you. Because these are young filmmakers going into the industry, making product that you would be proud of. Okay, here's a statistic for you. Media choices, movies, radio, mostly movies, TV, choices like that between Christians, believers, and non-believers are roughly the same. So I know that's a really chilling statistic. But our choices are all the same, and you can walk away from it or you can watch it, and we all end up just consuming it. But what if the church found its voice? Can you imagine how what I regard as a mission field, the media, would be transformed? And that's a goal too, because a lot of them are believers, but most of them, I would say, are questioning, and some of them, honestly, their just thinking is darkened. They just hate. Let me just point out, when the media seems to be against you, they're not really fighting against you. They don't know you. They're really fighting against themselves, because God puts it in all of us to know the difference between right and wrong, doesn't he? And so that you can kind of have some sympathy while you're mad at them. So we're plenty mad at them. And last year, our coalition really worked hard to help the church find its voice. And you know what? It did. We were really proud of the voting registration, how people ran for office. Then we had that last November election, and it's like nobody knew what happened. And nobody could question it because the media and certain politicians shut off the spigot so that we could not. Now, how does this work? Because again, there are more of us than they are of them. So this year, we got to thinking, and Kyle Horton and I were saying, we've worked with David Barton and Wallbuilders for about 25 years. And we were on a conference call and decided we'd just ask David Barton, our nation's premier historian, talk about boldness, who speaks 250 times a year already, if he would go out and show up face to face so you can shake his hand, look him in the eye. It's what we all want to do. I'm from California. It's why I'm here. I want to shake your hand and look you in the eye. Because the church, because you, the saints, are the apple of our eye. So look, I train people and push them out on the networks all the livelong day, as much as I can. Train them. They're ready with an answer. Believe me, we drill, we practice. And then they go out there and they take what we call media hits. They're out there all the time, expressing the Christian conservative point of view about all things policy, about all things life. But there are only so many of them. And the church, if they were to find their voice and just talk to everybody they know, can you imagine how much more powerful even than putting people out in the national media that would be? So how could we do that? Because, jeepers, hasn't public school kind of gotten rid of most of our wonderful, magnificent American history? At least that's their goal. And the media, did they ever know it? Not sure they ever knew it. But how do we know what it is we defend? How do we know what we're going to preserve if we don't anymore really, truly know our American history, which is magnificent? It's miraculous. It's majestic. I grew up in LA, public school in LA. They used to teach this to us. So just that quickly, they're like this. They do not want you to know. There are certain people on the left, we say left because they're progressive and they would like America to be something other than what she really is. The left does not like David Barton. They wish that he would just go away because he undermines all of their plans to make America something different. There are historians, aplenty, but it's particularly David Barton and his son Tim that they would like to see go away because they own 160,000 original American writings. In their library, they and their teams of researchers comb through these original writings to piece together exactly accurately what the American story is. And it is a wow. It is electrifying. It is the most amazing story you have ever heard. David very graciously is here. He's traveling around 250 plus 44 cities. He's doing it because he told us this needs to be done. The saints need to be reminded again what it is that God raised this country to do. He is the co-host, primary host of Wallbuilders Live on the Bot Media Network. He is sought after all the way up to Capitol Hill for his thoughts on American history and what he knows. He is super, super in demand, but he is here with you today. Please, ladies and gentlemen, please do welcome Mr. David Barton.
Thanks, Joan. Appreciate it, ma'am. Thank you, ma'am. Yeah. Yeah. Guys, I'm going to do a lot of slides over here on the side. I want to start today with the word history. This is one thing the Bible emphasizes is recalling the former days, which is history, knowing the former times. And you find that throughout the scriptures, whenever people remember who they are, remember their history, they behave differently than when they forget. We're at the same place in America today. There's a man named George Orwell has a great quote about history. He said, "Who controls the past controls the future. Who controls the present controls the past." Now, let me take that in parts. Who controls the present controls the past. That's where we are right now. The way we're teaching history right now helps you create an image of what the past was like. Now, if we don't teach it accurately, you're going to have a bad image of the past. But your image of the past is going to affect what you want the future to be. So with now, there's a lot of folks saying America's fundamentally flawed. She's never been right. Well, if that's true, then you don't want her to continue in the future. She needs to be something different. But if that history is wrong, then you're going to end up changing something that doesn't need to be changed. So really what happens right now, the way we present history is very important. For the last several years, actually since about 1980, we presented a view of history called deconstruction. It came from a guy named Howard Zinn. Howard Zinn was a history professor. He wrote a book called The People's History of the United States. And what he chose to do, now in history and in truth, you tell the good, the bad, the ugly. You tell everything that happens. In the Bible, if you know the story of David, David's a great worshiper. He had such a heart after God. God made a covenant with him that his family would sit on the throne for generations. But David also was a bad parent in many ways. He never said no to his son Adonijah. His son Absalom tried to lead a revolt to kill the father. His son Absalom also killed his brother Amnon, who had raped David's daughter. So just really bad family situation. You also have David who committed adultery with Bathsheba and killed her husband Uriah. Now, that's bad and that's ugly, but there's also good. And there's more good than there's bad and ugly. But the way we teach history today is we would teach the history of David showing only what he did with Bathsheba and Uriah and showing nothing else. We wouldn't cover the book of Psalms. We wouldn't cover any of the good stuff he did. We wouldn't cover how he repented, changed, how his heart was changed, how God touched him. And this is what happened in this history book. He took everything bad he could find about America and said, this is what America is. And that is part of what America is. And you're always going to find good, bad, and ugly in every nation. But what he did was left out all the good. And so now we've been for 40 years saying America is bad, it's flawed, it's got all this bad stuff. And we do have bad stuff, but we got a lot of good stuff too. And so what happens now is we're at a point where this has become our policy in many ways. If you go to something like the College Board is what does the SAT, excuse me, College Board is what does the SAT test. They also do the AP test. There's 47 different AP classes you can take. If you're in high school and you want college credit at the same time, you're in an AP course. So these are really sharp and bright high school students that take this, but the tests for all 47 courses are done by the College Board. Now, interestingly, when you take something like U.S. history, which is what I'm talking about right now, the standards for U.S. history in the AP course is 162 pages of standards. It is interesting to see what's in those standards and what's not in those standards. For example, when you look at the standards and what's in those 162 pages, what you find in early America is there weren't any founding fathers. We don't want to talk about them because they were all bad, they were all racist, they were all whatever. So we don't talk about founding fathers. We don't talk about the birth of America, nothing about the American Revolution, the first battle, Lexington, all the way to the last battle. There's nothing there in that aspect. We also don't have Abraham Lincoln. There's no Gettysburg Address. There's no Emancipation Proclamation. There's nothing about his assassination, of course. If Lincoln's not there, then you're not going to have the Civil War either, so we don't cover either side in the Civil War. We don't cover any of the battles that happened in the Civil War. That's all gone. And even if you get into more modern times like World War II, there's no major battles in World War II that occurred in these U.S. history standards. There are no major leaders, whether it's Patton or Eisenhower or Nimitz or anyone else, and there's not even the enemy. I mean, you look at the standards, and Hitler was taken out, and the Nazis were taken out, and the Holocaust was taken out. So much of history is gone. And by the way, this is what's being used right now. All counties across the United States, all states in the United States use this AP history course, this test. So when you look at what's there, you say, well then, if we're not teaching any of that, what in the world are we teaching? What's there? Well, let me give you an example. For example, with World War II, just showed you what's not there. What we do say about World War II in the standards is that the decision to drop the atomic bomb raised questions about American values. Now, it's interesting. We did not question Hitler's values. We did not question Tojo's values because we didn't even talk about them. The only nation we're talking about is America, and they dropped an atomic bomb, which really raises questions about American values. You can come out of this history course thinking America is the bad guy in World War II. Now, back up for a minute to what happened in World War II. I mean, how does this raise questions about American values? It didn't in previous generations, it does now. When you look back to what happened in previous generations, take, for example, the way we looked at World War II. Hitler in the European theater, 40 million died in the European theater. You had the Holocaust where Hitler killed 6 million Jews and 5 million of inferior races. He didn't like other races, that he wanted his race only. So he murdered 11 million, and then on top of that, you had another 35 million deaths, military deaths in the conflict. We finally finish with Hitler. We do the D-Day invasion, and we push Hitler and Mussolini back into their lands. And so we end the war in Germany. Then we go to the war over in the Pacific Theater, and it was World War II who taught us that every military body should be able to handle 2 wars at the same time. We were not equipped for 2 wars. We just had one military, and it was deployed in one place, and that was mainly Europe. So we were kind of holding off on what happened in the Pacific Theater until after we finished the war in Europe. And then we jump over to what's happening in the Pacific Theater. And at this point in time, Japan has no allies left. Hitler's gone, Hitler's gone, Mussolini's gone. They're by themselves, and they won't surrender. There's no path to victory they have. They lost every single battle in the Pacific as we went island hopping. They lost battle after battle, and they still won't give up. And we, as Americans, knew something about the Japanese people back then that's very different from Japanese people today. The Japanese people at World War II were very much like ISIS is today. They were definitely into death and killing and dying and killing others. And if you want to honor your ancestors, you got to die a good death. And so they would not surrender. As a matter of fact, as we were winning things like at Iwo Jima and we were winning things at Guadalcanal, every Japanese family on those islands were given a hand grenade and said, if the Americans win, make sure you blow up yourself and your children and your family, kill everyone. You find that while Hitler killed 6 million Jews, the Japanese killed 10 million Chinese. They had a genocide going against the Chinese. The Japanese also went to Korea and took the women out of Korea and brought them back as sex slaves for their soldiers. The Japanese also taught their teenagers how to deliver suicide bombs, 3,400 suicide bombs. You also have the Japanese that had a whole different view of life. The first American submarine that surrendered to the Japanese, the sailors, the Japanese took every sailor up on top of the deck, laid them down on the deck, and with a sledgehammer went down and smashed every American sailor's head, just like a melon, just crushed it. So we said, these people have a really twisted view of life. And so what happens is, as we get into Japan, we don't want to do a ground invasion, we do air invasions. We're doing bombing, we're bombing from above. And we eventually end up dropping the atomic bombs. Now, how did we get to the atomic bomb? Well, General Curtis LeMay was in charge of the Army Air Corps. And so they have B-29s, B-24s, B-25s. They're bombing Japan, and they don't want to invade because they don't want to lose all those lives. And he finally said, look, these Japanese are not giving up. We've killed 100,000 in Tokyo with traditional bombing, and they're still not giving up. They don't have a path to victory. Are we going to have to invade Japan to end this? And so he said, if we do, what's it going to cost us? And the experts came back and said, well, if you invade Japan, 1 million Americans will be killed. Between 2 and 4 million allies will be killed, and that's the British and the French and the Australians. And you're going to have to kill somewhere between 5 and 10 million Japanese before they give up. So you're looking at about 15 million lives if you have to get out of the air and get on the ground and invade. And so at that point is when Harry Truman said, no, we're not going to lose 15 million lives. We've already lost 20 million in the Pacific. We're not losing another 15 more. And so he took the atomic bomb and dropped the atomic bomb. Now, it's interesting. Before we dropped any bomb on Japan, before we dropped the atomic bomb or other bombs, we dropped something else. We dropped these leaflets. We actually dropped 70 million of these leaflets. And these leaflets on the back in Japanese say, Japanese people, the Americans are coming to Japan. We're going to destroy all the military facilities. We're going to bomb every military facility we can find. And here's the 35 cities we're going to bomb. And we told them the 35 cities, including Hiroshima and Nagasaki, where we dropped the atomic bombs. Said, tell your leaders to give up. We do not want to kill a single civilian. So we're telling you the cities we're going to bomb so you can get away from those cities. We don't want to hurt people. We just want to end the war. And so, as you can imagine, that was not very safe for the American pilots because now the Japanese know the 35 cities we're going to bomb. Guess where they set up all the anti-aircraft guns and shoot the American planes down? So we endanger our own lives to try to get civilians out of these Japanese cities. They still wouldn't give up, and after all the aerial bombing, they still wouldn't give up, and that's when Truman said, we're not going to do a ground invasion. Let's drop the atomic bombs. So we dropped the atomic bombs, and when we dropped those and by the way, before we dropped them, we had captured the island of Saipan. We set up a radio station called KSAI. Every 15 minutes, America broadcast to the entire island of Japan, the bomb is coming. Get away from the city. The bomb. We told the Japanese every 15 minutes for hours that that bomb was on its way to them. So did everything we could to save lives, and we eventually end up dropping the atomic bomb. And when we dropped the atomic bomb, 150,000 were actually two bombs, August the 6th and August the 9th of 1945, Hiroshima and Nagasaki. 150,000 Japanese died as a result of the blast. Another 150,000 Japanese died as a result of radiation. So that's 300,000 Japanese that died as a result of the atomic bombs versus what would have been 15 million lives. I'm not sure I have a problem with American values at that point. We've done everything we could to keep civilians from being killed, including endanger our own guys. And we said, rather than taking 15 million lives, let's just end this with 300,000. By the way, 300,000 seems like a lot, but you also need to know that in one single Japanese prisoner of war camp, they beheaded more than 300,000 prisoners in one camp. The Japanese officers actually had beheading contests. This happens to be an Australian soldiers being beheaded in this camp. The Japanese officers had beheading competitions to see who could behead 100 prisoners the fastest. And they would go down with a line of 100 prisoners and just whack, whack, whack. And if it's a tie, you bring out 10 more and let's have a runoff. I mean, we can't even think like that, but we today don't even know that's what happened in Japan. But that is why we have the pictures of the stuff. That's why we've got the artwork and the leaflets, because this is what happened. So we're not telling this part of history today, but what we are saying is America dropped the atomic bomb and we're the bad guys in World War II. Now that's the present showing what the past is, but if you learn that as the past, what do you want your future to be? We don't want to be like we've ever been. Well, then you start changing the nation. No, I'd rather be like what we've been and trying to save every life we can, but preserving life along the way. So this is what we have with the things that go with AP history. It's more than just this now. A number of states this year passed their new history standards for the next 10 to 14 years, depending on what state. And they've said, starting now, we're no longer in our history standards. We're no longer going to teach the American Revolution or the Civil War or World War I or World War II or the Holocaust. All of that will now go away from American history standards. So if we don't teach that at all, what are we going to teach? Well, we're going to teach the 1619 Project, which says America is fundamentally flawed, and you have to have a complete change of the nation because it's been bad since the very beginning. From the very roots, it's bad. So we don't cover anything in the middle. We don't show what America's done or how it's grown. And so this is what we see in a number of areas. This is why we see a rise now of things that hate America. It's why we see a rise of Marxism and socialism and communism. They're going after America. This is also what you get with critical race theory. A lot of people don't understand what that is. They think it's just black on white kind of conflicts. And yes, we've had black on white conflicts in America. We've had plenty of them. Every nation has. But America overcame them faster than other nations, which is the part we don't say. There's always, why do we have racism? Because you have people involved. As long as you have people, you're going to have sin. There's not a nation in the world that hasn't had racism. By the way, every single nation in the world at one time was enslaved, and another time enslaved others. That's just the story of the world. It's not unique to America, and that's the only nation we're being told about. So when you look at what happens here, this is why so many groups have arisen in the last 18 months that are so violent in what they do. That has resulted in all these peaceful protests that burn down cities and kill people. Not a peaceful protest, but nonetheless, they believe in things like rioting and radicalization and rebellion. This is common to all the groups, and this is what comes with critical race theory. And if you don't know what that is, let me take you back to the critical race theory position. And it says that it takes as a starting point that America was founded to protect and preserve slavery. This is the 1619 Project. It points to Jamestown. Jamestown was founded in 1607. In 1619, the first slaves arrived in Jamestown. They say, see, this is America. It's what it's always been. Okay, there's more to the story. Let's go to the second load of slaves that arrived in America. They arrived in Massachusetts where the Pilgrims were. The Pilgrims then promptly freed all the slaves and imprisoned all the slave owners, and they quoted to the verse in Exodus that banned man-stealing. Man-stealing was to take someone from one nation, transport them to another nation to sell. That was a capital offense in the Bible. And so that's why in the northern states, slavery was just not there. Now, if you want to look only at southern states and say, look at the blemish of slavery, do it. But not every state in the United States was a southern state. And that's why you find, for example, that in northern states, You had blacks elected to office in 1641, like Matthias de Souza. You had black founding fathers like Wentworth Cheswell, who was elected to office in 1768 and reelected for the next 49 years by a white community. He was a great patriot in the American Revolution. We have folks like Thomas Hercules, black men elected in a totally white city because, as they said in the newspaper, we just believe in merit. Whoever can do the best job, we want them. We don't care what race they're from. That's a side of the story that's not there with the 1619 Project. They only want to look, and by the way, while we're on the 1619 Project, let me point out that in 1619 there were Portuguese slave ships going by on the coast, off the coast of Virginia, and 2 English privateer ships attacked those Portuguese slave ships and took them. Now, privateers, like pirates, you take everything in it, now belongs to us. They said, well, we got a bunch of slaves here. There's about 40 slaves here. We don't want slaves. We don't need slaves going to sea. Let's just drop, and each ship got 20 slaves, 19 to 20 slaves, and they said, let's just drop this off at Jamestown. And so they went to Jamestown and dropped these 19 slaves off and said, hey, you guys want to buy some slaves? They said, no, because slavery is illegal in Virginia. Well, we don't want them. We're just leaving them here. So they left the slaves there, the 19 slaves, and they were slaves, but they didn't stay slaves. Once they got to Virginia, slavery was not legal. They became what were called indentured servants. That's what whites were as well as blacks. Indentured servant just means you have to pay your way for 7 years, and after that point in time, the government will give you a piece of land and you'll have no debt at all. You get to start fresh and clean. That's how people came to Virginia. Most were indentured servants. So at the end of these years, all 19 of those former slaves were now property owners, and they became wealthy in Virginia. One of those guys was a guy named Anthony Johnson. He was on that original slave ship. He had been a slave. He was dropped off there, became an indentured servant. He became a very prosperous landowner. And so he started sponsoring indentures, and that means you want to go from Europe to America, but I don't have the money to get over there, so would you guys loan me some money? Well, I'll loan you the money, but you're going to have to pay it back. Well, here's how you pay it back. I'll give you all the money for your training, your room, board, education, transportation, and you work for me 7 years, and then we'll call it even, and you get your own set of land, and you're all free. So that's what folks did to get to America. So Anthony Johnson started sponsoring indentures, started sponsoring other people to come to America. And at the end of 7 years, they were free, they got land, they became landowners, except one of the guys he sponsored was a guy named John Kaser. John Kaser was a black man. Anthony Johnson's a black man, John Kaser's a black man, and it happens that in 1653, Anthony Johnson took John Kaser to court and said, this guy is supposed to work for me 7 years. He has been such a lazy bum that if he works for me the rest of his life, he won't pay off everything I've invested in him. So I'm asking the court, can I own this guy for the rest of his life to make sure he pays off what he owes me? And the court said, yeah, you can. The first time you have legal slavery in America is a black man suing to own another black man. Now, that's not in the 1619 Project, but that is part of what happens. Now, that doesn't mean all slavery in America was black on black, not by a long shot, but I would point out that the father of black history, Carter Woodson, in 1930, looked back to the census of 1830. And in the census of 1830, found that 43% of the free blacks in South Carolina owned black slaves. 40% of free blacks in Georgia owned blacks. Black on black slavery was high percentage. The highest percentage slave owner in America were Native American tribes. There were 5 tribes. The average Native American tribe, 12% of the population were black slaves. So Native American, for whites, it was about 8%. For Native Americans, it was 12%. So you have red on black slavery, you have black on black slavery, you have white on black slavery. It's just all colors because it's the human heart that's the problem. It's not race and it's not the colors. Now, there were more black slaves in America than any other race, but that wasn't the same in every nation. In the 16th century, there were more white slaves in the world than there were black slaves in the world. As a matter of fact, when the Republican Party was formed in May of 1854, the 2 platforms they had was ending white slavery and ending black slavery in America. Didn't know there was white slavery in America. No, we don't seem to cover that anymore. But that's historically what happened. So going back to Jamestown, what happens is they say that America, the critical race theory takes as a starting point that America was founded to protect and preserve slavery, which is not true. It did happen in parts of the nation, didn't happen in the rest of the nation. And it says that the American constitutional system is the source of society's ills, and the chief ill that America suffers today is that of racism. So if you want to get racism gone, if you want to get rid of racism, what you have to do is get rid of the American constitutional system, and that's what they're advocating. If we need a complete redo of all the system. Let's just get rid of it and start again. Now, interestingly, we don't seem to understand what we actually have. When you look at the Constitution as we have it today, It's interesting. This is the document that we've used to govern ourselves for more than 2 centuries. And a week ago last Monday at the National Archives, where they house the actual Constitution and the Declaration, they now have put up a warning label that says, hey, these documents contain harmful language. Don't read the Constitution, don't read the Declaration. Time out. The Declaration, Constitution, this is where all men are created equal. This is the document that banned slavery in America. This is a document that granted equal civil rights. Don't read it? Yeah, because it's got harmful language. So we're now being told don't even read our history. Stay away from our history. So if we actually read the documents, and by the way, this is what every government official takes an oath to uphold, is the Constitution, but don't read it. So we're at the point now where we really don't appreciate America like we should. And let me give you an example. There are 193 nations in the world right now. Of those 193 nations that we have in the world, America, one of the 193, we got our Constitution back in 1789. We've had only one Constitution in our history. Let me show you what the rest of the world looks like. In the same period of time that America's had one Constitution, imagine living in any other nation in the world. Look at the instability that they have. Look at what happens, how many constitutions they go through. Look at every other, it doesn't matter whether they're allies or whether they're enemies. Every nation has gone through this. Now, significantly, when you see that, a good question to ask is, what's the average length of a constitution in the history of the world? And the answer is 17 years. For all of the nations in the world, the average constitution lasts 17 years, and on average, every nation has a violent revolution every generation. America's only had one violent revolution, and we've had our Constitution now 234 years. We don't seem to appreciate that. Let's get rid of the system and get a totally new system. No, actually, I like not having a revolution every generation, having a new Constitution every century, but we don't know that. We don't understand that. The same with our creativity. America is only 4% of the world's population, and yet our 4%, instead of produce 4% of the world's population should produce 4% of the world's whatever, and that's not what we did. We have produced more innovations, more cures, more technologies, more medical discoveries, more space exploration than all the other 96% of the world combined. We have so much we take for granted. No other nation in the world has what we have. I speak at a lot of military bases, do a lot of training for U.S. military, soldiers, officers, et cetera. And I was asked to go to Germany and speak to military bases there. There's about 27 military bases in Germany. So I was there, and they really treated me well. I'm a cowboy from Texas, really simple life, live out on the ranch, and they put me up in a 5-star hotel in Germany. Now, Germany that's the old world elegance. That's where you got all the castles and all the cool stuff. And so I'm at this 5-star hotel in Germany, and it was a good experience. I mean, when I walked in, everybody called you by name. Hi, Mr. Barton, what do you need today? And it's super good service. And it would have been even better service if they'd had internet at that 5-star hotel. They didn't. Now, even Motel 6 in America, every Motel 6 has got internet in America. 5-star hotel in Germany, no internet? See, we have so much we take for granted, and we assume that what we've got, the rest of the world has, and that's not the case at all. Matter of fact, our 4% of the world's population, we produce 25% of the world's wealth, and it's not because we have greater natural resources. As a matter of fact, the U.S. Census Bureau, done last year, they reported the stats this year. According to the U.S. Census Bureau, if you live in poverty in America, your lifestyle is higher than the middle class in Europe. So the lowest of low in America is better off than the middle class in Europe. I mean, America's just been blessed, and we just don't understand that, and we want to tear it down and do it all again. Crazy. But that's why it's important how we teach history. What we have now is called American exceptionalism. This was a term that was given to us back in 1831 by a guy named Alexis de Tocqueville, who came to America, wrote a book about how special we were. And if you want to know what makes a nation exceptional, you typically look at its political leaders. You say, well, who are the leaders responsible for what we enjoy? Well, let's go back to the American founding. You got people like George Washington. You got people like John Hancock. You got people like John Adams. These are all important folks, no question about it. What's interesting to me, historically speaking, is in 1816, a young man named Hezekiah Niles contacted John Adams. Now, Hezekiah Niles did not go through the American Revolution. John Adams did. He's an eyewitness. He's part of forming the government. Hezekiah Niles says, I'm writing a history book about America. I wasn't there when this happened, but we really appreciate what you old guys gave us. I mean, the nation we have, this is remarkable. So, Mr. Adams, I'm asking you, as you look back over what happened 40 years ago, who do you see as being responsible for all the freedoms we enjoy in America today? And John Adams said, you're asking me who's responsible for what we have? He said, well, right up top, I would tell you the Reverend Dr. Jonathan Mayhew, or Reverend Dr. Samuel Cooper. You also have the Reverend Dr. Jonathan Mayhew, and of course there's the Reverend George Whitefield, and don't forget the Reverend Charles Chauncey. Interesting to me, he didn't call out political leaders, he called out spiritual leaders. He said these pastors are the guys responsible for. Now, we don't talk about these guys today. You might know who Whitfield is, but probably you've never heard of Cooper, Mayhew, or Chauncey, and they were the big guys back in the day. See, we don't talk about pastors whether they're white or black. I mean, who in the world is Richard Allen? He's a soldier in the American Revolution, started the first black denomination in America, one of the first black positions in America. Who's Applin Jones? He's the first black bishop in any major denomination in America. He too was a physician, particularly in the yellow fever epidemic of 1793. He's also in the American Revolution. Then you got guys like John Moran. Who's he? When he was 13 years old, he became the first black American to successfully evangelize the Native American tribes. He converted the Catawba tribe, the Hausar tribe, the Creek tribe, the Cherokee tribe. I mean, fantastic story. His book was one of the 2 best-selling black narratives in American and world history. The only guy who competed was a guy named Eluda Equiano, who was a black man over in England at the time, who resulted in England's law to ban the slave trade. These are the top 2 black narratives in American history, and most people have never even heard those names today. You got people like Lemuel Haynes. He's the first black man in American history to receive a degree of higher education. He's also the first black man to have a sermon published. He also was a soldier in the American Revolution. He was one of the famous Minutemen, and in his churches, when George Washington's birthday came along, he preached a sermon on George Washington, his commander-in-chief, under whom he had served in the Revolution. This guy, black pastor, pastored white churches all over New York, all over Massachusetts, all over Vermont. He's a remarkable man, and we've never heard. You would think that the first black American to receive a degree of higher education might get a head nod in somebody's textbook. No, don't talk about it. And the same thing with Harry Hoosier. Now, Harry Hoosier's a fun story. Harry Hoosier was a preacher in the Great Awakening, and so there were a lot of preachers back then who had massive crowds. George Whitfield did. Francis Asbury had massive crowds. And Francis Asbury said, Harry Hoosier gets bigger crowds than we do. I mean, this guy gets the biggest crowds of all. One of the founding fathers named Benjamin Rush, who John Adams says he's one of the 3 most significant founding fathers and most notable, Benjamin Rush said, I've heard Harry Hoosier preach, and he's the greatest orator I've ever heard. Well, wait a minute, you've heard guys like Patrick Henry and all these other great guys. Nobody's better than Harry. So Harry Hoosier had a real ministry with what we would call the blue-collar people. The pioneers, the explorers, the mountain men, the trappers, etc. And Harry had preached really all along the East Coast. And the East Coast, he preached over in Philadelphia and Jersey and Delaware. And as these guys would get converted, their lifestyle would change because they're rugged guys, they're mountain men, they're tough. And their language changed and their behavior would change. Well, as America started growing west, as it went west, explorers wanted to go west too. So all these guys that got converted by Harry Hoosier, they start going west. And by the time you get to 1807, 1808, the furthest west in America we had gone was the Indiana Territory. And a bunch of these guys show up in the Indiana Territory, and the other trappers said, man, these guys are different from the rest of us. What's the deal with them? And the answer was, oh, they're a bunch of those Hoosiers. Now, interesting, you might recognize the word Hoosiers with Indiana. The Hoosier State. I wonder how many people who live in Indiana know that they were named after a black evangelist. Probably very few. Now, you would think that a dude who has a whole state named after him might make somebody's history book. Don't cover him today. We've never heard of Harry Hoosier before. See, these were the guys back at the beginning that we pointed to, and these were the guys that were so influential. So when you look at what John Adams said, and I'm not sure what's going on with the projector, but John Adams, talking about these pastors, he said, our pulpits have thundered. And literally, when you look at what we have in the documents like the Declaration of Independence, historians have now documented that every right set forth in the Declaration of Independence had been preached from the American pulpit prior to 1763, which means the Declaration of Independence is nothing more than a listing of sermon topics we'd been hearing in church for all those years going up to the American Revolution. And so when John Adams said our pulpits have thundered, he was exactly right, and I can show you that in many ways. Let me take you back to that period, because as Joan mentioned, we own about 160,000 documents and artifacts from American history. So let me take you to some of the early sermons they preached. This is a sermon preached by the Reverend Dr. Jonathan Mayhew. It's one of the guys that John Adams pointed out. This is a sermon occasioned by earthquakes in 1755. Now, if you're in California, you're used to earthquakes. If you're in Boston, you're not used to earthquakes. So when the earthquake hit in 1755, the deal was, what does the Bible tell us about earthquakes? Now, if I asked most of you today to tell us what the Bible said about earthquakes, you might have a little trouble coming up with the answer. Now, I try to read through the Bible cover to cover once every year. I think every Christian should read the Bible cover to cover once every year. So I specifically remember the earthquake under King Uzziah in 1 Chronicles, and Amos talks about that in the book of Amos. I remember the earthquake that happened when Jesus died, where the veil of the temple was rent. I remember the earthquake that happened when he was resurrected. So I could probably give you a good 20-minute sermon on the Bible and earthquakes. Well, good for me. That's a 5-week sermon on what the Bible says about earthquakes. A 5-week series? Are you kidding me? You ought to get online and just look up earthquakes in the Bible. It is amazing how many earthquakes happen in the Bible. We just don't even notice. See, we're not looking for practical application like they did. 5 years later, the Reverend Dr. Samuel Cooper preached a sermon on the Great Fire in Boston. Again, if it's in the headlines, we went to the Bible to see what it said about what's in the headlines. So we looked at natural disasters. We also had sermons like this one called The Cry of Sodom. This deals with LGBTQ issues. By the way, if you're not aware, it's no longer the LGBTQ movement. Most LGBT groups descended on Texas last November and working to try to get working to get health standards changed. And so they've made clear that the new title of their groups are LGBTQIA+. Now, why the IA+? Because they got into having 4-letter groups, 5-letter groups, then it went to 8-letter groups, then it went to 13-letter groups, then it went to 17-letter groups, then it went to 21-letter groups. And now that they've identified more than 90 different genders, you can't keep adding letters. So they call it now IA+, which the plus adds all the other groups that are out there. So we had topics on this. Most Christians today don't like confronting this issue or addressing this. The Bible is very clear about it. So many passages in the Bible. So we dealt with that issue as well today. This is a sermon on the discovery of a new planet. This is Uranus, 1847. Here's a sermon you see at the bottom. It's 2 sermons occasioned by the late blazing stars, comets. Do you remember comets in the Bible? And there's a number of examples. You just get online and look it up. It's, again, amazing to see how practical the Bible is. Here's a sermon on solar eclipse, 1806 sermon. And I could not remember verses on solar eclipse, so I read the sermon. And this preacher spent a lot of time in the little bitty book of Amos in the Bible, which not only has solar eclipses, it has lunar eclipses. And so I got online and looked up eclipses in the Bible, and there's a bunch of eclipses in the Bible. And for some reason, I've just never noticed them before. We noticed them in previous generations. We saw the Bible as a guidebook for every aspect of life. So we dealt with astronomy. This is a sermon on the infirmities and comforts of old age. Probably not a particularly enjoyable sermon for most people. Got news for you. Every one of us is growing from the day you were born, you've headed toward your death. That's what you've been headed for. Because from the time you're born, you will get old and you'll have to deal with family who gets old. So what are the issues of aging? We covered those because that's something every family has to deal with, every individual has to deal with. So we covered aging issues. This is a sermon on the importance of education, proper education of children. There is no biblical model for what we now call secular education. We're told from the beginning, the fear of the Lord is the beginning of knowledge. We're told in Proverbs 9:10, the fear of the Lord is the beginning of wisdom, which is much more important than knowledge. When you have knowledge and apply understanding to it, then you come up with wisdom, and wisdom is how you solve problems. So the fear of the Lord is the beginning of all of that, and that's what education was. So there's no model for secular education like we have with 88% of the nation today. We had sermons on education. This is a sermon, well, it didn't come up. Let's see if I can back it up. Well, it's a sermon on, it's called Religion and Constituents of a Good Soldier. It's from 1755. That sermon in 1755 was a deployment sermon for the military, but the Bible addresses military extensively. Even when John the Baptist was baptizing, he had specific instructions for officers and for soldiers. So we had military sermons. Here's a sermon on the relation of the medical profession to the ministry, healthcare. The greatest healthcare code in the world was given in the Bible 3,000 years ago. At the time that God gave the health code to the Israelites, and there on Mount Sinai, he gave them not just the 10 Commandments, he gave them 613 laws. And a number of those laws dealt with health codes. And so back then, the Babylonians looked at the Israelites and said, these guys are backward. Look at their health codes. And that's what the Egyptians did as well. These guys are crazy. And now today, every single health provision in the Bible, we can put multiple studies to showing the Bible was right 3,000 years before anybody else got it right. Because it wasn't the Hebrews who were so smart. They were a bunch of former slaves who had been enslaved for 400 years. They got out to that mountain. They were used to thinking like slaves. They weren't thinking like the academic world. And God says, here's going to be your health code. And that's why the other nations laughed at him and said, what a silly health code. We know better than that. Well, now it turns out that that's about the health code in the history of the world. It was what happened with the Bible. We also have sermons on present commercial distress. It's hard to see, but in the middle line there on the right, it says 1837. This is the economic collapse of 1837. It was like the Great Depression in 1929. The whole economy just went upside down. And we had sermons on that. And this is a sermon on what's disappeared. This sermon it's a sermon on the issues, or what they call the issues of the property tax. So a sermon Reverend Glover gave it. The Bible talks about all sorts of taxes, including the capital gains tax, the capitation tax, the progressive tax, progressive income tax, the estate taxes. The Bible has so much to say about economics, and that's why the economic system we use in America, the free market system, it's the greatest, we're the most prosperous nation in the world. That free market system came out of 5 Bible verses, came out of 2 Thessalonians 3:10, 1 Timothy 5:8, Matthew 20, Luke 19, and Matthew 25. Those are the 5 verses used to build the free market system that we have in America. So we had a lot of sermons on economics. This is a sermon. This is in front of the Virginia legislature. It's the sinful and pernicious nature of gambling. Today, 95% of Christians cannot name a single Bible verse that addresses the issue of gambling or lotteries. This is a sermon on, it's called The Liquor Law of Massachusetts, a Good Law. 1852, Massachusetts legislature passed a law. We said, here's what the legislature just did. What does the Bible say? No, here's what the Bible says. All right, that's a good law, because they did what the Bible said. So that's why it's called a good law. This is a sermon from 1791. This is the injustice of the slave trade. Again, up north, voices spoke out against slavery from the beginning, because the Bible tells us that in Christ there's neither slave nor free, there's neither Jew nor Greek, Scythian or anything else, neither male or female. In Christ, everybody's equal. And so that's what we believed in biblical parts of the nation. These are the kind of sermons we had. This is a sermon, Marriage Scripturally Considered. 1837, New Hampshire passed a law on marriage, and pulpit said, well, here's what the legislature just did. Here's what the Bible said. Okay, that law is okay, because here's what the Bible says about marriage. So all of these issues, and by the way, this is a fun sermon here, 1851, Sermon on the Fugitive Slave Law. Of the millions of federal laws that have been passed, this is probably the single worst law in American history. This is a terrible law. And you get into it and the provisions of it, just because someone accused you somebody walks up to me and said, hey, Barton, you used to be my slave in Kentucky. You're a fugitive slave. You ran away from my plantation. Just because they made that claim, even if it's totally false and totally egregious, at the time somebody made that claim, I'll lose my right to trial by jury, I'll lose my right to be defended by an attorney, and I'll lose my right of habeas corpus. In other words, you can't get me out of jail. I'm going to stay in jail. Just for being accused? What if it's a false accusation? Doesn't matter. And then the law said you're going to have to go before a federal magistrate, and if that federal magistrate rules that you used to be a slave and you've escaped, then he gets paid $10. But if he rules that you've never been a slave and you're not going back into slavery, he only gets paid $5. We were paying judges to come up with bad rulings that violated justice and Constitution, and that's why pastors across America did this sermons like this. It says, Christians, you have to disobey the fugitive slave law. If you obey it, you're disobeying God. So if you follow this law, this bad federal law, you're not obeying God. You have to we call it for open civil disobedience. And this is, by the way, where the Underground Railroad really gets started. And it was pastors and it was Christians who led the Underground Railroad because of things like this. So we dealt with all sorts of social policy in the day. Controversial things, we jumped right on it. If the Bible talked about it, we talked about it. This is on elections, so there's a lot about government. You've already heard Chad and others talk about government this morning. So this is why John Adams says our pulpits are thundered, and they literally had. You look at the kind of sermons on our website. We put up 260 of these old sermons. There's thousands of them, but I just chose 260 because they're pretty cool. The topics they talk about are things we never think about today, but the Bible deals with those issues. So first thing is get in your mind that the Bible deals with a whole lot more than just your salvation. Salvation is super important, but it also gives you everything necessary for life and godliness, as we're told in the epistles as well. So whether it's economic issues, whether it's military issues, whether it's education issues, it's all there. It's all there, science stuff as well. So when you look at where we are, and by the way, all of these address biblical relevancy. Whatever's in the headlines, the Bible addressed. And so when you look at where we are today, it's interesting that for a lot of Christians today, we don't see that relevancy. And everything that's popping up here on the screen behind me, these are all things that have been in the news in the last 24 months. And I chose them specifically because every one of those things is also specifically addressed by Bible verses. So every Christian should be able to look at that list of topics and say, here's what the Bible says about all of these things. And that's why I chose those topics, because the Bible talks about it and it's in the news. See, the Bible's still relevant to all this stuff. Now, the problem we have is most Christians today don't have a clue what it is. As a matter of fact, only 6% of Americans can look at those issues from a biblical perspective. We just don't know what they are. And so even with pastors and churches, we don't do what we used to do. And I'm an ordained minister, and I've been on a bunch of church staffs in a bunch of states. And looking at where we are now, we do a lot of polling work with folks like George Barna. There's 384,000 senior pastors and churches in America, and only 2.8% of pastors and churches are willing to address items that are in the news. And so the Bible is relevant to that. That was our history doing that. That's why John Adams said, you're asking me who's responsible for America? It's these preachers right here. These are the guys who are addressing that kind of stuff. So that's part of the background. Now, when you look at where we are, the number of Christians in America has been steadily falling for 20 years. Back in 2000, 85% of Americans professed Christianity. Here we are 21 years later, and it's only 65%. So we've had a 20% drop in 20 years. And when polling people who leave the church and say, why did you leave the church? 2 out of 3 people said, I left the church because there's nothing relevant there. There's nothing that helps me know how to live on Tuesday or Wednesday or Thursday, or what to do at work, or what to do with my family, what to do with my business, whatever it is. So relevancy is something the church has to get back to, because the Bible's still relevant to everything. We just got to make sure people understand how relevant it is. This is why you see a lot of people in America saying we got to have a revival. It's time for the church to wake up. It's time for the nation to wake up. A lot of people praying for revival. I've been involved in lots of prayer meetings where there's been arenas of 100,000 people who get together and pray and fast for a day, praying for revival. National Day of Prayer 3 years ago had 50,000 groups meeting at civic locations praying for revival. And while that's a good prayer, I think we've got a major problem. I don't think we're going to see revival the way we want to see it. And the reason is we have an obsession with the national focus. And let me kind of put this in perspective. Everybody gets their news from somewhere. Whatever your social media feed is, whatever you watch. Typically, if you're on the right, you're going to watch Fox News or Victory News, or you're going to watch Newsmax. If you're on the left, you're going to watch MSNBC or CNN or whatever. Everybody's going to get their news somewhere. But the interesting thing is all of our news is national news. You have not heard a story about Waterton, New York. You've not heard a story about Scottsbluff, Nebraska. You haven't heard anything on Yukon, Oklahoma, or Jacksboro, Texas. We get a big dose of national news. And so as a result, our eyes turn more to what happens, for example, in Congress, what happens in the White House, or what happens in the Supreme Court, and what happens in the White House. And I will tell you, I'm intimately involved in all that. Just before I came in today, I was talking to a number of senators and U.S. congressmen. There's so many guys in Congress that are very close friends of mine. We text back and forth, but I was talking to them because of what's going on in Afghanistan. About 4 weeks ago, the military asked us to take over the evacuation of refugees out of Afghanistan. And so we've moved thousands and thousands out, and we're having to fight the State Department to do it. The State Department's worse than the Taliban right now in getting people out. We've identified about 7,000 Christians in Afghanistan. The Taliban is looking for them actively. Back in 2016, on their national ID cards, they actually put their faith down, because back then when America had control of Afghanistan, faith's got a law. You could be Muslim and Christian and Yazidi and all these things, and we didn't kill each other. Well, now that we've lost control of Afghanistan, Taliban is going door to door looking for these Christians, looking to kill them. I got word that last week there was a Bible study going on in one of the homes, and the Taliban broke in, found the Bible study, and murdered everybody in the room, just killed everybody. Right. So the Christians in Afghanistan, it's a big issue, so we're working to get them out. 6 years ago, a national media guy named Glenn Beck started what's called the Nazarene Fund, and he and I run that fund. And we have, when Taliban and ISIS first moved into Iraq, we were able to get several 100,000 out of Iraq and get them to safety. We're able to send them to Australia, to Brazil. We sent them to Slovakia. We sent them to Canada. We could send them anywhere but the United States. The United States wouldn't take refugees at that point. So we sent them across the world, and now here we are again. We're letting anybody come into America across the border, but we can't get these Christian refugees into America legally. It's a weird thing that we've got right now. So I'm really ticked off at the federal government in a lot of ways. I've been involved in 13 cases of the U.S. Supreme Court. Supreme Court is what's created most of the cultural crisis we have in America. They're the ones who said you can't have prayer and Bible in schools, but you do have to have abortion. And by the way, you can't define marriage as man and woman. All came from the court. So I look at stuff, and you know what? With all the connections I've got, I can't get a single bill done differently in Congress. I can't get the President of the United States to deal with Afghanistan differently. And by the way, just as a little historical commentary, You know, once we defeated Germany, we left a bunch of bases in Germany. And we did, and Europe's been really stable since then. Once we defeated Japan, we left a bunch of military bases in Japan, and Pacific's been real stable since then. And after we got out of Korea, we left military bases in Korea, and so that's been a deterrent to what North Korea wants to do. It would have been so easy to keep bobbing there. The military said you only need 2,500 soldiers. We could have had complete stability in that region, but because we pulled out of that region, there are now 20 different terrorist groups that have moved in. Taliban 3.0 is in, as well as 2.0. The 3.0 version is called the Haqqani Taliban, and they're really mean. You thought the Taliban before was mean? These guys are unbelievably mean. We've been dealing the last week with Taliban just going, saying, you're a Christian, and taking and just cutting off someone's arm or cutting off their hand. 2 days ago, we're dealing with 2 ladies who got shot just for thinking that they might be Christians, and so trying to get, you ever try to get bullet holes patched up or amputations dealt with from 6,000 miles away? It's a little tough to do. And so all of this is going on because we did not leave anybody behind to take care of stability in that country. So I'm ticked at the White House too. See, but you know what? A lot of people don't have the connections I've got. So we all are frustrated with the federal government, and that's the problem with national news. You see what goes on nationally, none of us can change it. There's not a single one of us can change that. Our problem is we should be looking at local stuff, not national stuff. Let me take you back to what happened in the American War for Independence. The first 4 battles of the American War for Independence you see here. I'll just go from top right around counterclockwise. Top right is the Battle of Lexington. That's the 19th of April, 1775. Top left is the North Bridge at Concord 3 hours later. Bottom left is the battle on the road to Boston 2 hours after that, 19-mile running battle. And over in the bottom right, you have the Battle of Bunker Hill. Now, you take that first battle. And by the way, if I can back up for a minute, these first 4 battles that occurred, nobody at all contacted George Washington. He's the national commander-in-chief. He's the general. Nobody contacted him and said, George, we need your help bad. 700 British has just showed up on our front door. We need you here. Nobody contacted George. Every case, they said, it's our community. We'll take care of it. You take care of the important stuff. We'll take care of our community. And so they all acted locally. Now, George was very needed in some battles, like the Battle of Yorktown, the Battle of Brandywine, the Battle of Monmouth. Those were more national battles. But most of the battles, overwhelmingly, in the American Revolution were local battles where local people took care of it. So if I take you up to the top right there, the Battle of Lexington, April 19, 1775, 700 British came to town, and 70 townsmen of that little bitty town went out there to take on 700 British. Actually, that's not quite accurate. It wasn't 70 townsmen. It was the church of the Reverend Jonas Clark who went out to defend the town. They said, this is our town. You're not going to do this in our town. And Jonas Clark had been preaching to his guys and said, guys, if war comes, God will not bless an offensive war. He will bless a defensive war. If somebody shoots at you, you have the right of self-defense, but you don't have the right to start anything. And so when the 700 British came to town, he sent the church out there to defend the town, and the deacon of the church, John Parker, said, okay, guys, remember what Pastor Clark's been preaching. We can't start this. He said, but he said, don't fire unless you're fired upon. If they start it, you can get engaged. And he said, if they mean to have the war, let it begin here. We're not going to back up from these guys. So they were outnumbered 700 to 70, and they did not get the first shot. The British did. So when you get 700 guys shooting at 70 guys there, you don't get to shoot back, and everybody's got a single-shot musket. That's when 18 Americans hit the ground that morning. 18 Americans hit the ground, and they included black patriots like Prince Estabrook and white patriots like John Robbins. They went to church together, but we don't get that narrative today. That's not what people need to know about America. And by the way, I've given you a lot of black names already. I can give you so many heroes of the American Revolution that were black that we never heard about today. We're just convinced that we've always had racial tensions, and yes, we've had tensions, there's no question. I can tell you about some really bad stuff that happened with slavery, but I can also tell you about a whole lot of good stuff that happened that nobody talks about anymore. So when you look at what happened in that church, that's where 2 hours later, or 3 hours later, the British made it over to Concord, to North Bridge at Concord. So at North Bridge at Concord, you had a total of 300 Americans come out to face the 700 British. And actually, that's not quite right either. It wasn't 300 Americans, it was the church of the Reverend William Emerson who went out to defend the town and said to the British, you guys aren't going to do this to our town. And by the way, since you fired at our brethren back down the road, we now get to fire at you. And so that's where the first British hit the ground, is there at the Battle of Concord. Well, the British said, this is not moving the right direction. We had just 70 Americans, now we're facing 300. We better get back and get reinforcements real quick or we'll be outnumbered. And that's where on the next 2 hours they fought the battle on the road to Boston. And that battle actually lasted a number of hours, but 2 hours later they're in this battle. And you have the 700 British trying to get back to Boston, and they're facing 4,500 Americans along the way. Now, where did those 4,500 Americans come from? Well, Reverend Payson Phillips grabbed his church and headed for the road, so let's go take on the British. And Reverend Benjamin Balch grabbed his church and see, it was people saying, this is our community. You're not going to do this in our community. It was local people standing up, and that's how we had the battles. And by the way, when you get that last one there, that battle right there, the Battle of Bunker Hill, that's where Reverend Joseph Willard said, hey, I got 2 companies in the church, let's head across town, take on the British. So it was churches that did this across. And by the way, can I point out, I'm going to see if you can see this here. Can you see that guy on the bottom right there where I'm circling his head? That guy is Peter Salem, black patriot. He's standing beside a white guy named Thomas Grosvenor, black and white together. Peter Salem was the hands down hero of that battle. He and another black patriot named Salem Poor. They had 13 commendations from the officers that day saying, these guys are unbelievable. We wouldn't be alive if it hadn't been for these 2 guys here. They got to be promoted. And in our textbooks all the way into the 1900s, we had long sections on Peter Salem, what he did to save that battle and be the hero of the battle. And that's why John Trumbull, when he painted this painting, put Peter Salem right up there where you could see him. You'd make sure and see the hero of the battle right there, Peter. There are so many heroes, and not just soldiers I can give you, heroes I can give you, that are the dudes responsible for victories. So this is the stuff we're not getting anymore. But notice that with all of this, you look at this, the reason we won the American War for Independence was we had so many local victories that it looked like a national victory. See, when all the localities are winning their battles, it looks like the nation's winning its battle. And so it's really more of a local focus. They weren't looking for George to come in and save them, and you know, he's the national commander-in-chief. A whole different focus, and that's what we've got to do even on revivals. We're talking about we want revivals in America. We got to have a spiritual change. Revivals occur locally. Well, if revivals occur locally, then what do you do with the Great Awakenings? Because those were national revivals, right? I mean, you got George Whitefield. Look what Whitefield did in the Great Awakening. He's the big name in the Great Awakening. The guy preached 34 years. He preached 18,000 sermons. The dude's unbelievable. Matter of fact, he preached 18,000 sermons in America. He preached another 16,000 sermons in England. He preached 34,000 sermons in 34 years. That's 1,000 sermons a year. That's 3 sermons a day. I don't know anybody can stand up to that schedule. And so what's interesting about Whitefield is 80% of all Americans physically heard him preach a sermon. Now, you can imagine 80% of Americans today hearing the president or something else because of the high-tech media we've got. Not back in that day. You got no media at all. So there's nothing. How did 80% of people hear him preach a sermon? Because he was in 80% of the communities in America. You see, for 34 years, he rode a horse from Maine to Georgia, back to Maine 7 times, and stopped at every community along the way preaching the gospel. And so what happens is he stops over here, a town of 500, they have a revival. He stops here in Philadelphia, a town of 12,000, they have a revival. Goes to Westchester, a town of 1,500, they have a revival. He's going community to community, having revival after revival after revival. Communities are turned around, and that's how the whole nation got turned around. It wasn't a national revival. It was local revivals that looked like a national revival because so many communities had revivals. And that's why we don't look at names today like Samuel Cooper. Remember, he's the guy that John Adams called out? Samuel Cooper was the guy who kept the revival going in Boston. If you get over into the Philadelphia area, it was Gilbert Tennant. He was the guy who kept the revival going in Philadelphia. And you get over into the rural areas of Virginia, and it was Samuel Davies who kept the revivals going. See, it was people like this that had the revivals going in the communities, which is why it looked like a national revival. So the focus, once again, is looking at the local level, not the national level. Now, this obsession we have with the national focus has got to be replaced. If that means weaning yourself off the national news, or watch the national news, but just pay attention to what's going on locally. So what happens with this? The same thing happens with voting. You know, to vote in the United States is a very easy process. There's only 2 things required to be a voter in the United States. You got to be 18 years old, and you got to be a legal citizen. If you're that, 100% of those who are 18 years old who are legal citizens can vote in America. Great news. The one thing we do ask you to do is please register to vote, because we want to make sure that you voted and 7 people didn't vote for you or whatever. Right now, only 65.3% of Americans are registered to vote. So right off the bat, you got about 120 million Americans that I don't care what happens to America. I'm not going to be involved in nothing. And so even something as simple as voting, right off the bat, we've taken 120 million Americans who won't even register to vote. Now, when you take and look at elections, there's 2 types of elections. One is what we have, the presidential year elections. When you look at presidential year elections for the last 10 presidential elections, actually the last 11 presidential elections, the average voter turnout of Americans is 54%. But that's not 54% of the adults. That's 54% of registered voters. So 54% of 65% means that you get 36% of Americans choosing the President of the United States. It only takes half that to win. So you have 18% of Americans choosing the President of the United States in the last 11 elections. It's not like we got massive voter turnout, because we don't. When you go to off-year elections, which is what we're going to have next November, it's when you choose the governors and the senators and the congressmen, et cetera, the average turnout over the last, in this case, last 22 elections, the average turnout has run right about 39%. Now that's 39% of 65%, which is 26% of citizens, which means half of that to win, which gives you 13%. So when you look at elections, what we're talking about right now is 1 out of 5 Americans chooses the President of the United States, and 1 out of 8 Americans chooses our governors and senators and reps. We just really don't have that many people actively engaged. And when you go to the local level, it's even less than that. Local level turnout is around 6%, but that's 6% of 65%, which means about 4% of adults vote in local elections. It takes half of that to win, which is somewhere around 2%. Let me give you examples of how this works out. If you were to go to the state of California and look at Los Angeles is one of the largest cities in the nation. The population of Los Angeles is larger than the population of 23 separate states. So if you're the mayor of Los Angeles, that's like being a governor in 23 other states. It's interesting, the mayor of Los Angeles is Eric Garcetti. Eric Garcetti brags that he was elected with 2.9% of the vote. That's like having a governor elected, are you kidding me? Less than 3% of population in Los Angeles, and he chose him governor. And by the way, he's been super hostile in churches and super hostile in faith, everything else. He's not a friendly guy toward constitutional rights. And then you've got cities like Houston. Houston, my state of Texas, in the city of Houston, that's another huge city. The city of Houston has a population larger than 20 different states, and the city of Houston chose Anise Parker as their mayor. She was the first open lesbian mayor in Houston's history. And so as she got in, she said, you know, I'm really tired. And by the way, she got in with 4.9% of the vote, but that's 4.9% of the 65%. So she got in with about 3.3% of the adult vote. Here you are, it's like being a governor again, really small. Well, she was really ticked at Christians. She said, you guys keep saying that marriage is between a man and a woman, and that's discriminating against me for you to say that, so I'm not going to let you say that anymore. So she got the city council to enact what's called a HERO ordinance. Now, HERO stands for Houston Equal Rights Ordinance, HERO. There are other equal rights ordinances. Charlotte had one, different equal rights. About 200 cities in the nation have these equal rights ordinances, and they're basically the larger cities. And the Equal Rights Ordinance, it became a hate crime for you to say that marriage is a man and a woman. And if you say marriage is a man and a woman, that's a hate crime. For example, San Antonio, also in Texas, they also passed one of these ordinances. And so for San Antonio, they said, if you say that marriage is between a man and a woman, that is a Class C misdemeanor. You're fined $500 for each occasion where you say that. And by the way, if you ever say that marriage is between a man and a woman, then you're disqualified from ever holding office in San Antonio. You can't run for office. You can't even do business with the city. I can't be a paving contractor. I can't be a landscaper. I can't do any of that. This is what's happened in 200 cities. Now, when it happened there in Houston, she said, I know of 6 pastors who specifically said marriage between a man and a woman, and I'm coming after you. And so she did. She issued subpoenas. You got to turn over all your sermons. I got to read your sermons and see if you said something bad. I want to see all your social media. I want to see all your texts. I want to see all your emails. I mean, legally, she's going after these 6 pastors. And the city of Houston said, whoa, time out. That wasn't what we thought equality meant. I mean, that's not it at all. It's not crushing the other. This is crazy. And so they said, let's put this on the ballot for a referendum. Let's do a referendum over this HERO clause. So 4,500 churches got involved, and they said, all right, let's get it on the ballot. And those 4,500 churches got on the ballot, and the day before the election, I helped run this election in Houston, get these 4,500 churches involved. And the day before the election, see, the Houston Chronicle, Houston Post did a poll, and it says, well, the Christians are going to get crushed tomorrow. It's going to be a 60-40 landslide according to our polling. Well, they're used to having 2-3% turnout. We had a 14% turnout, which is not that big, but it's 5 times bigger than they've had. And that 14% turnout, we ended up winning the referendum by 22-point margin. We won 61-39, crushed the other side. Houston has not tried that again since then, and this has been a number of years ago. So simply getting people involved and getting the 14% is still pathetic, but nonetheless, that's higher than what it had been. And so you see what happened in Houston. Another one I would point you to is Fort Worth Independent School District. Fort Worth 6 years ago said, we decided we don't think there are genders at all. There's no male or female. And so we're not going to have any bathrooms that are gender bathrooms. And in all the schools, we're not going to do anything with locker rooms. You just choose the locker room you want. You choose the shower you want. And we're going, really? Well, it got picked up nationally. Arnie Duncan, who was the Secretary of Education under Obama, said, this is a great idea. We'll make a new national policy. He said, any public school that gets federal funds, you can't do genders. You can't have gender bathrooms, gender locker rooms, gender shower rooms. And so it went all over the nation. Now, I've got to tell you, this was really disappointing for me because Texas is my backyard, and Fort Worth is specifically known as Cowtown, USA. Being a cowboy from Texas, I can tell you, if you live in the country, you know exactly how many genders there are. It's real. You can look at those critters and tell what gender they are. As a matter of fact, we also know that they can't change genders. A bull doesn't become a cow, and a cow doesn't become a bull. It's just the way it is. And you're saying that out of Cowtown, USA came the national policy. It really ticked me off. So I looked to see what happened in the election. In the Fort Worth election, there were 800,000 voters in Fort Worth, so it's a pretty good-sized town. And as it turned out, the president of the school board who brought this policy forward that became national was elected with less than 1,200 votes. 1,182 votes is the number of votes that he had. And so I started looking around in the district, and I quickly found an evangelical church that had 3,000 evangelical adults in that church. And that's the district where the school board president was. That one church could have taken care of that election, and it would save the whole nation. The whole nation got this policy, and that's where everything took off 6 years ago. And it could have been solved by one church taking care of local business, taking care of the school board president that was right in their backyard. They didn't even know who it was, didn't know what he believed about anything, hadn't checked into that, just didn't know. And then it blew up on them. So other examples I'll give you, Bentonville, Arkansas. Bentonville is the home of Walmart. There's 40,000 people who live in that town, and a Christian lady in Bentonville said, nuh-uh, you ain't doing this in schools here. As a matter of fact, I'm running for school board. And so she ran for school board, and in that town of 40,000 people, she got elected with a total of 35 votes. That's all the people that voted in that school board election, 35. She won the election with 35 votes, more than the other opponents. If you go to Riceville, Iowa, up in Riceville, Iowa, there was a farmer up in Iowa who said, you ain't doing this in our town. And so he ran for school board, and it turned out that on election day, he got busy on the farm and didn't get to vote on election day. And don't think he lost by one vote, because that's not what happened. What happened is nobody at all voted in that election. If he had voted for himself, he would be on the school board. The only vote cast in that election would have been his. Nobody voted at all in that election. So this is what we see at the local level across the United States, so many examples of this. And so South Lake is the final example I'll give you. South Lake is a city in Texas, about 150,000. And it's a city where that's unlike a lot of the cities in the United States. There's no racial tension there. Black students, white students get absolutely the same academic scores. Everything was good. It's a very nice community, very peaceful. Everybody gets along really, really well. And the school board started saying, now, you guys really don't realize it, but you guys are oppressors. Now, you don't realize it yet, but we're just telling you, you're oppressed. And you guys didn't know it, but you're actually oppressed. Wait a minute, the scores are great. And now the school board is injecting this stuff in to make us not like each other, to make us fight each other. And so what happened was a lot of people in the community said, that's not right, and we don't think that should be taught. And so 51 churches got together and said, okay, who's running? And they said, well, the mayor's up for election, and there's 2 council members up for election, and there's 2 school board members up for election. They said, okay, that's 5 slots. These guys are all on the wrong side of the issue. Let's check our 51 churches, see if we can't recruit 5 people out of our churches that have the beliefs. And they did. And they looked at them and said, yeah, these guys, they have the right beliefs, the right character, the right values, a Christian character, they're good folks. So let's run them. And so what happened was the Sunday before the Tuesday election, all 51 churches put up on their screen a slide that said, here's 5 guys running for office, running for mayor, running for city council, running for school board. Said, now, we're not telling you who to vote for, but we are telling you we've vetted these guys. We've screened them. These are good folks. They have the right beliefs, and we're just encouraging you to think about them when you go vote. They voted on Tuesday night. On Tuesday night, the turnout was 3 times higher than has ever been in that city. All 5 of those people won with a landslide 70-30 victory. It wasn't even close. See, this is what can happen all across the United States, and this is where things change, is at that level. So the local focus is there. Now, to get that local focus right, why would we even be involved in government at all? I'm going to take you back to Dr. Benjamin Rush. Dr. Benjamin Rush, I mentioned him earlier. John Adams says he's one of the 3 most notable founders. He's a great educator. He started the first abolition society in America. He trained the first black physicians in America. He started academic education for women. He started 5 universities. 3 of them still go today. He's one of the top educators in American history. He's called the father of public schools under the Constitution. And what he did in peace in 1791, he said, you know, we used to have 13 nations. Now we got 1 nation, 13 states. What do we need to be teaching in public schools if we're going to survive? He said, well, the first thing public schools should do, and this is the piece where he did it, 1790, he wrote this piece. He said, the number 1 purpose of public schools is to teach young people to love and serve God. So that's the first thing. He said the number 2 purpose of public schools is to teach young people to love and serve their country. Number 3 purpose of public schools, teach young people to love and serve their family. Please notice the order there. God, country, family. Most folks I talk to today would say, no, the order's wrong. It should be God and then family and then country. Family's more important than country. Rush said, no, it should be God and country and family. Why? Because as he pointed out, he said, if you ever lose control of your country, it will become the great enemy to the family. So one of the best ways you can serve your family is by not losing control of civil government and making an enemy to the family. And so that's why he had the priority the way he did. Now, that's what we're seeing in schools now across the nation, secular schools, all the stuff coming out of there that's trying to set the nation against itself and try to make us forget our history and throw away all the stuff that happened, make ourselves something. Let's go to a new constitution every 17 years or whatever. You know, it just doesn't even make sense. And that's why you've seen all across the news in the last 6 months, people taking on their school boards and running. So this is going to stop. You become an enemy to the family. You become an enemy to the faith. You become an enemy to the community. This is going to stop. So that means you have to have good people to run for office, like those 51 churches in South Lake that recruited people. So how do you get good people running for office? Because a lot of times you don't have good people running for office. You go to the Bible. The Bible, there's the parable of the trees of the field in Judges 9. Judges 9, the trees all got together and said, you know, we need civil government. We need to elect someone to be our leader. And so it said that the trees went forth to anoint a king over them, and they first went to the olive tree. And they said to the olive tree, hey, would you reign over us? And the olive tree said to them, not me. I've got too much stuff I'm involved with. And it says, should I leave my fatness wherewith by me they honor both God and man and go be promoted over the trees? I'm not going to get involved in government. Then they said, well, if we can't get the olive tree, let's go to the fig tree. And they went next to the fig tree and said, Mr. Fig Tree, will you come and reign over us? And the fig tree said, no, I've got too much going on. Said, should I leave my sweetness and my good fruit to go be promoted over the trees? They said, well, if we can't get the olive tree or the fig tree, let's go to the vine. They said, Miss Vine, would you rule over us and come and rule over us? And she said, no, I've got too much going on. Should I leave my wine, which cheers both God and man, and go be promoted over the trees? So what's got going here is all the good guys say, not me. I'm not going to do that. All got reasons they can't involve. When all the good people say, I'm not going to get involved in that area, that's not a spiritual area. God doesn't want us involved there. When we say we're not going to get involved, what happens is exactly what happened in the parable of the trees of the forest. Then said the trees to the bramble, oh, that's not going to turn out good for them. Then said the trees to the bramble, hey, why don't you come reign over us? And wouldn't you know it, the bramble said, I'd be happy to. Said, if you anoint me king over you, then come put your trust in my shadow. So quite frankly, how enjoyable is it to sit in the shadow of a thorn bush? Probably not real enjoyable. And see, the argument I would make today is most places we have too many thorn bushes, really. We've had all the good guys say, not me, I'm not going to do that. We have good guys that run, there's no question about it. I work with a lot of them. But we've had too many that said, I'm not going to get involved. And so we need to get less thorn bushes as rulers. How do you do that? Again, you go to the Bible. Exodus 21:18. This is the account of when Jethro, Moses' father-in-law, saw him trying to be the ruler over 3 million people. And he said, this is crazy. You can't do that. You need help doing it. And so Jethro said, you need to get help. And this is what he said in the scriptures, Exodus 18:21. He said, provide out of all the people able men such as fear God, men of truth, hating covetousness, and place such over them to be rulers of thousands, rulers of hundreds, rulers of fifties, rulers of... You need some local, county, state, and federal people. It shouldn't be you doing everything. Let's get government at all these levels. And here's the kind of people you want. You want able men such as fear God, men of truth, hating covetousness. Get people like that involved in government. And so Moses said that was a good idea. And so you'll find that in Deuteronomy 1 and Deuteronomy 16, Moses, in recounting this from his father-in-law, he said, felt like God was giving me a clear word there. He said, so what I did was I went among the 12 tribes, and I recruited people like that and brought them to you and set them in front of you and said, choose who you want. And so he recruited people, and then they had elections. Now, that's the interesting part about this. The people who provided the leaders were the people who did the recruiting, and that was Moses. So Moses, the spiritual leader, says, I went and recruited a bunch of guys, and you voted on them, you chose the ones you wanted. And that's what you also find when Saul became king. It was a spiritual leader. It was Samuel who heard from God and said, hey, God wants you in office. And Saul didn't think he should be in office. Remember when David was anointed king, same thing. Back up, that was Solomon. Back up, come on. When David was anointed king, remember, Samuel said, I thought it was going to be Jonadab because he looked like a king. This guy's got freckles in his face. He doesn't look like anything. But God, he said, I heard from God, and it's supposed to be you. So it was spiritual leaders that were the ones recruiting people for office and putting them forward. And one of the lessons of politics that you need to learn for sure is you want to elect people you don't have to lobby. Now, I've been in office before. I've been elected 5 times in Texas. And what I do now is I do a lot of recruiting. I recruit people for local office and for state office and for federal office, and a lot of those people in office. And you know what? I've never called a single one of them, not even one time, to tell them how to vote on any issue. You know, I never called any of my congressmen and said, hey guys, make sure that you vote marriage between a man and woman. That's why I recruited them, because they believe the right things. I don't have to call them and lobby them. If I have to call somebody and tell them that marriage between a man and woman, I've already lost the battle. You know, if they don't know that, we got problems. And so if you want to elect people you don't have to lobby, it means you have to recruit people you don't have to lobby. And that's where every one of us can do something in this arena. We can recruit people in our own community, our own church. Hey, there's a deacon, he's been really good, what he does with tithing, what he does with the family. He communicates really well, people like him. He needs to be on the junior college board. This guy ought to be on the public utility district. This guy ought to be the treasurer, whatever it is. We got good people among us, and we can't be like those trees that said, well, I've got too much other stuff going on, because you'll end up with thorn bushes as rulers if you do. So elections are important. I'll close with this final thought. Final thought comes from Charles Finney. He was part of the Second Great Awakening. As a matter of fact, he's the guy who really started the abolition movement per se. He said the Bible teaches equality, so Underground Railroad really came from him. Everybody who went to his college, Oberlin College, which don't go there today, but back in his day when he started it, it was the first school in America that treated blacks and whites, men and women as equals. And every kid involved in his college had to be involved in the Underground Railroad as well. If you're going to be a Christian, you got to put some deeds to your faith. And so he's just a dude. In 1 year alone, he led 100,000 people to Christ. Just unbelievable man. So Charles Finney wrote a book in 1835, Revivals About Lecture. He said, if you want a revival in your nation, here's how you get it. Because he taught that revival is a science, so you don't just wait around for God to show up. You remember 2 Chronicles 7:14, the Bible says, if my people who are called by my name will do this, this, and this, then I will do this. Well, if you want God to do this, then you better be doing this. And that's the verses he pointed to. Somebody in the Bible is an if-then. If you'll do this, then God will do this. He said, if you want a revival, then start doing this stuff, and God will show up. And so as part of it, this is one of the lectures he gave. He said the church must take, the church must take right ground in regard to politics. Politics are part of a religion in the country as this, and Christians must do their duty to the country as part of their duty to God. He said, God will bless or curse this nation according to the course that Christians take in politics. Now, what's significant, this was revival lecture number 15 called Hindrances to Revival. If you don't want a revival, then don't get involved in politics. If you want to see your communities change, you're going to have to get involved in politics. You see, this is what we taught for generations, and for whatever reason, we've moved away from that today as Christians, and that's just not historically sound, historically accurate. So if this is new information to you, we do have a book in the back called The American Story, which goes over so much of the stuff that I've talked about today. Founder's Bible shows the Bible verses that built America, etc. So this is what I wanted you to see about our past and where we are now. This is a challenge for us going forward. Joey, all yours, bro.
Thank you so much. I was one of those pastors that never got involved until a friend of mine invited me and my wife many years ago to go to D.C. She said, I want to give you a free vacation and put you up in a nice hotel. And it had internet, by the way. And we were introduced to David Barton. And I had a love that was birthed in my heart and my wife's heart after I heard him speak. God has His hand on him. Support his ministry, support him. And when you're looking for things about our American history, the first thing I go to for pastor or for sermon research and everything, I go to Wallbuilders. I do. That's where I go. I get so much great material there, and my church thinks I'm really smart when I use it. So it's great. Now, I give all the credit to him, to David Barton, because they have done a lot of research. And thank you so much. Thank you for taking time to do this in our country. It's a huge deal. You know, it's crazy to think that if God really established government, that He would not want His people involved in what He established. If you're 18 and under in here, stand up for a second. If you're 18 under, stand up. 18 and under. Yeah. Well, you don't clap for them. Yeah, that's good. So listen, what you guys heard today, most 18 and 18 and under have not heard what you've heard today. So take it. Go research it yourself. Go find it yourself, because God is calling y'all to lead. He is calling y'all to lead. So understand that. You're not many Christians. You're not many people. You're not many leaders. You are leaders now. And I truly believe that. The hope right now is in you guys and what you're going to do. And God is going to use you in mighty ways. So I just want to make sure you check out their website. Also, you can check out Faith Wins website. You can also use the QR code on your phone, and a lot of great information. And continue to pray for Chad and David and everybody as they go on throughout the rest of the country to take this news, this amazing news, to the rest of the country. So Pastor Tim, thank you so much for letting us be here.
This is life-changing, and I want you to take this and share it with others. We're going to have these things available and resources out here. I want you just to understand that he was not speaking just to be heard today. He was speaking to be repeated. And so you've been empowered now. You've been equipped. We'll do everything we can to help you along the way, because this is life-changing and freeing. The truth shall set you free, right? And so it's empowering. And thank you, Brother Barton, for being here. It's our honor to have you and to host you and your wife, and just how the Lord is using you and others. Thank you for being here. We're just honored to know that God is raising up people in this generation to challenge this next generation to step up and speak up for the glory of God and the good of others. Give a voice to those who don't have a voice, the oppressed, the poor, the needy. May the Lord help us to find our voice. Let's stand. We're going to close in a word of prayer. You've listened very well, and I commend you for that and thank you for it. And as I lead us in prayer, we're going to close together in our hearts in tune with the Lord. I want you to think about this. What would God have for you? I know there's a lady that was at Pensacola Christian College serving in Congress right now, and said that God spoke to her under David Gibbs' preaching and challenge about serving God through serving your country. How would God have you serve? Would you pray this prayer, Lord, what will thou have me to do? Show me what you want me to do, Lord, and I'll do it. Let's pray. Lord, it's been a wonderful, wonderful day, a wonderful few days in our state with Brother Barton. Please bless him, Lord. Bless his dear wife and family. May your hand be upon them as they travel. May you give him grace and strength. And Lord, I pray that you protect them and bless them. Thank you for the ministry and the folks working with them back home. May your hand continue upon them, Lord. And thank you for Brother Chad and all that are working with Faith Wins. May you bless them today. And Lord, thank you for the Lindsays and their kindness and their encouragements in this great endeavor. Bless them, Lord, and these who've gathered. Lord, I pray that you would stir our hearts, especially these young people here. And Lord, that you would help them to see the great possibilities of their lives, how you can use them. And Lord, I pray that you would speak and you would call, draw them unto yourself, Lord, we pray. We love you and we thank you for what's going to come out of a meeting like this. Out of this tour, Lord, bless it now as it goes forward across this country in Jesus' name. And all of God's people said, amen. God bless you. Thank you again for being here. Greet someone as we have our students dismiss, and I know they're going to be loading up, okay? God bless you. Thank you for coming.